The government has been accused of misleading the public. I know, you probably won't believe it, over this Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which has been much the subject of debate back and forth over on social media, because yes, it was used with the reasoned amendment, with the appending of this calling for a national inquiry, and that was obviously used to shine a spotlight on very important issues. But in the meantime, because the issues have been highlighted so much, lots of people seem to miss out the rest of the reasoned amendments against this bill. Some people flat out refusing to believe that that's actually anything to do with it. And it's been quite frustrating back and forth with some on X, particularly trolls that have no names and so on. So you really shouldn't feed the trolls, but by the by. At the same time, Rachel Reeves is in China, and I've got this impending fear of doom that she's somehow selling us out. More about that a bit later. And in rather sad news, many private schools are closing and their children are having to uplift and go elsewhere. Now, yes, many schools close all the time, but these are arguably pushed over the edge by the VAT. So let's come back to the beginning. But before we get started, if you are new to me, I'm Daniel Shensmith, a barrister of England and Wales. I'm really grateful to 700,000 of you to subscribe to my channel to help you understand law and news and current events and politics and everything else. Really grateful to you for that. Subscribe if you want someone independent and free from the mainstream media. I am your man. So let's have a look at what's going on here. So Laura Trott MP has penned a letter to the Permanent Secretary in the Department for Education about this schools bill, because it's quite remarkable, actually. It was flat out wrong, this statement that was made. So she says, I'm writing regarding an inaccurate and misleading line concerning the government's Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill that was issued by the Department of Education's press office to the Telegraph yesterday. In the line that was issued, the spokesperson praised academies and stated that far from getting rid of them, we want to share the best practice and make sure that all schools can benefit from the flexibilities that they have. This is simply not true, she says. Now, if you remember from my other video, one of or a couple of the objections to this bill was that it was curtailing the freedom, independence and autonomy of academies, which is, in a democracy, they can disagree with. They can say that we don't agree that this is the way it should go forward. We don't agree with changing these things about academies. And that is obviously part of the reasoned amendment. I say obviously, some people think it isn't. Some people think it's just flat out refusing to proceed with it because of the call for the inquiry. Now, granted, that was tagged on at the very end, but it was part of it. It was certainly a part of the reasoned amendment. But the reasoned amendment was very much more than that. It was, and it comes down to this point here. The government have been accused of misleading the public because they said, far from getting rid of them, we want all schools to have the benefit of the flexibilities that they have. And that is simply not true. She goes on. As you will know, this bill is unambiguous on its approach on taking away flexibilities from academies. The department's own policy summary of the bill, published on the government website, states clearly, on the curriculum, this measure introduces a requirement for academies to teach the national curriculum in the same way as other state-funded schools. On teachers' pay, as part of broader changes to create a core offer and a school system more rooted in collaboration and partnership, this measure will extend the statutory pay conditions framework to include academy schools and alternative provisions academies, creating one overarching pay and conditions framework. Thirdly, on qualified teacher status, amending Section 133 of the Education Act 2002 will extend to academies the requirement for teachers to be qualified. The definition of schools will be expanded to include academies of a description specified by Secretary of State and Regulation under this section. So on each of those grounds, it's reeling them in, reining them in, and bringing them under control. It's telling them what to teach. It's telling them what to pay. And it's telling them what status of qualification they must have. So far from the flexibilities being dished out to all schools, this, in fact, is curtailing the freedom and independence of these academies. And so that statement, I agree on that basis, is just plain wrong. And if I could divert your attention just for one moment to plug something for myself, I have my own website, BlackBeltBarrister.com. Initially, I set it up to assist bar students with evidence in chief, cross-examination, court skills, conferencing, and those kind of things. But recently I've had the idea I'm going to put a lot more content on there and respond and have much more of a community base on there where I can respond by video to your questions, your thoughts, your scenarios. It won't be a replacement for formal legal advice. I mean, all legal advice should be formal, but I will be putting on there lots of different content. It is a membership site and I'd like to build that as a community with you guys, so please do check it out. BlackBeltBarrister.com, linked in the description, and I'll see you over there. She goes on. Clearly, both the line issued by the department's press office and the summary of the bill published by the department, quoted above, cannot be true. I'm writing to you to urge you to protect the impartiality of the department and ask that this bill progresses through Parliament, and as this bill progresses through Parliament, that you ensure that misleading statements surrounding the impact of this bill it will have are not actively perpetuated by the Department for Education. This is vital to ensure that civil service is protected from accusations of political spin. But more importantly, it will help to ensure that parents have an accurate understanding of the truth about the future of their children's education. And that's absolutely key, because when we come back to this debate over this vote, it was not just about calling for a national inquiry. That was to bring attention on those issues. And I've said many times, if it's political point scoring, fine. That's what your MPs are supposed to do. Constituents have views. They channel them through their MP. The MP is supposed to represent the views of those constituents. And if they want attention on these issues, that's what they're supposed to do. So calling attention and focus on these issues is absolutely critical. And when it comes to things like this, when they are saying this is what this bill is going to do, and if that's wrong and the public are misled as to what the bill does, that needs to be corrected. And it's clear from some of the I'll call them conversations over on X, that some people just flat out don't know, don't understand, disagree, refuse to understand or accept what this reasoned amendment was. The reasoned amendment against this bill was essentially that it is going to take away independence and autonomy from these academies. And the government has been accused of flat out misleading the public with respect to that. Speaking of things being misleading, if you follow Guido Fawkes' interesting publication, I'll link it below. It says, before Christmas, Keir Starmer claimed at Prime Minister's questions that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak had COVID convictions. A falsehood, seeing as a fixed penalty notice does not a criminal conviction make, which the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, would be expected to know. And so he'd said that they had convictions, and obviously a fixed penalty is not a conviction as such. And so relatively quietly, Cabinet Minister Georgia Good now retracts the claim on Starmer's behalf in parliamentary written answers to Richard Holden, and writes as follows. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, was referring to the fixed penalty notices received from former Prime Ministers for breaking COVID lockdown rules. The Prime Minister is happy to clarify that a fixed penalty notice does not constitute a criminal offence. He stands by the relevance of raising to the attention of the House that the two former Conservative Prime Ministers were fined by the police for breaking COVID rules, but they put in place for others. So a correction, albeit a quiet correction at that. But now we look at Rachel Reeves in China when she was criticised for not being in Parliament when she was still in the UK. I mean, you know what it's like when you're about to travel and you don't want things to get in the way, like being in Parliament when you're the Chancellor and things like that. But nonetheless, she's been off to China. And reportedly, this is GB News saying that working people to get £600 million in a landmark China deal. Now, aside from listing China companies on the stock market and so on, I can't really see what the UK specifically is giving up for that. It fills me with dread to think of what exactly the UK is providing for this £600 million or the 600 million to working people. Given that, according to the Treasury, Labour's attempts in re-engagement with China is likely to deliver up £1 billion of value for the UK economy. However, she emphasised that Britain will challenge the global superpower on areas of disagreement. So hopefully that's all positive. I very much look forward to seeing how this £1 billion of value for the UK economy will manifest. And hopefully it won't be to the detriment of many people. But speaking of the detriment of many people, again, we read that the third private school in a week has closed, and they've blamed, at least in part, the VAT raid as that takes effect. Some of them just closing overnight because they have no choice but to close the doors. Not only that, you can also read from the Telegraph that private schools are slashing bursaries, as I said they would a long time ago when this was being announced. I said that schools will have no choice but to cut those bursaries. So for some people that would otherwise have been given the opportunity to go to those schools without being able to afford it, will now not be able to do so because they will cut those bursaries. But in other good news, the Free Speech Union has launched a petition, and the petition now has, that's screenshots over 10,000 signatures, but if we have a look at the petition, over 15,000, nearly 16,000 signatures now, to abolish non-crime hate incidents. If you're not familiar with what non-crime hate incidents are, I'll link my previous video below and where I talk about it in more detail. But in essence, as it shows on this petition here, it is an incident that involves an act which is perceived by another person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice towards people with a particular characteristic, i.e. race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, transgender identity, and so on. Now, I don't condone, I don't support any kind of hostile action towards each other and things like that, but where it doesn't amount to an offence, respectfully, it's none of the police's business. They shouldn't be involved. If it's not an offence, they shouldn't be involved. I've said before, my wife's Chinese. Therefore, whilst out and about during or after COVID, we received a fair bit of hostility, to be quite frank, one of which was so severe that we did report that to the police. And at the time, the police said, not a crime, nothing to do with us, we won't do anything about that. And I thought that was... I thought that did cross a line, at least for malicious communications. But the police were not interested. And so if it's not a crime, that really should be it. But a non-crime hate incident is where someone will have this recorded against them, even without any evidence gathering necessarily, and they'll record it against them just because someone's reported it, that they have perceived. Their perception is that something has been motivated by hostility or prejudice based on one of those characteristics. So I think that is a step too far. I don't think the police should be recording those things. So this is a petition to abolish non-crime hate incidents. If you're interested in that, I will link it below. 10,000 signatures gets it a response from government. 100,000 will get a debate in Parliament. We know that this will not be binding in any way, but at least it is the opportunity for people. This is one of the democratic opportunities for people to have their voices heard, have their concerns raised, either responded to by government or debated in Parliament accordingly. So if you're interested in that, I will link that below. We're not even done yet. Daily Mail this time reports that Rachel Reeves is now looking at slashing billions of pounds off disability benefits, like personal independence payments. Now, not only has this now affected the elderly, these budgets, it's affected employers, it's going to affect workers. We've sort of gone through in enough detail to confirm that we think it's going to affect workers' pay and so on. Farmers, children, and so now the disabled as well. So if this is true and that she's looking to slash billions of pounds off disability payments, some of which, granted, may be claimed fraudulently, we know that there are certain levels of fraud going on in that area, and some people really shouldn't need it, shouldn't deserve it. But let's say for the vast majority that are genuinely claiming it, genuinely need it, there's obviously been an assessment. I mean, these personal independent payments, those are, for example, people that have a long-term disability, a mental health condition, and they need additional help with living costs, and so it can be used for heating bills, specialist equipment, taxi fares, having someone to come out and help, and all of those kind of things. All of those are subject to assessment, fairly detailed assessment. Quite a rigorous process they go through to be authorised for these personal independence payments. Now, assuming all of those that have been assessed as requiring these payments, it's needed and it's there for a purpose, a very good purpose, and they are now dependent on those, quite literally dependent on the payments and the assistance that provides. If they are just removed, certainly if they're removed overnight, how are they going to proceed if they now depend on that money? Because they will be obviously in a deficit themselves and they won't be able to do all of the things that they were doing before. And they simply won't be able to live to the same standard that they were. So if there is going to be a cut to the tune of billions of pounds in disability benefits payments there, it really needs to be managed carefully, because apparently this is expected to rise from £22 billion a year to £35 billion a year by 2029. And of course, government is going to struggle to pay for that. So a lot of people will have different views on this as well. A lot of people will think that too much is paid out and too many people are paid out. And obviously, being a lawyer, I know of a lot of different stories where people are claiming it, have been claiming it, where they really shouldn't be claiming it. But obviously, many people genuinely need it. Well, there's a bit of a roundup for Saturday. There's been a few things floating around in the news. A few fairly frustrating, let's call them debates, back and forths on X, where people just don't understand these things and yet are commenting on them, and in some instances resorting to being rude and calling other people names and things like that, when actually they don't even understand it themselves. But I hope you found that interesting. Have yourself a fantastic Saturday evening. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.